State's 2023 report. This year's report, I think, is the most robust we've had over the 10 years. And the theme for the report, the topic, it's time to reset, rejuvenate, and reimagine our power to resist, act, and win. And so you will hear from our dynamic trio who lead development of our annual report. And our moderator for the hour is our sister Jocelyn Tate, who's a senior tech policy advisor, but also serves as a assistant editor for the report. And she will introduce our co-editors in chief, who will walk us through what we were able to garner from some brilliant minds from local to national to talk about the status of Black women, so that we use this report every year, not just to release a report, but to use it to help us as a roadmap for the Black Women's Roundtable, to make sure that every year we're able to take a temperature check on the status of Black women. So I'll turn it over to you, Jocelyn.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Melanie. Hearing a little echo. We'll just fix that. Bear with us for a moment. We're just having a technical issue. Thank you so much, Melanie. And I am so pleased to introduce and release this report today. I've worked with two dynamic women who have been the editors of this report this year. They are Dr. Avis Jones DeWeaver and Dr. Elsie Scott. I'm going to turn it over to you ladies to walk us through some of the high points of this report. And Dr. Avis, I'll turn it over to you. Oh, you'll start with the first section.
Good morning, everybody. I am Dr. Elsie Scott, and I'm pleased to join with Dr. Avis DeWeaver again this year to co-edit this report. So we'll start with talking about resetting and expanding our power. Okay, in resetting and expanding our power, the essays that we have looked at how there's been an increase in the number of Black women entrepreneurs, as well as the increase in the number of women corporate leaders. However, we still continue to only have 2 women that are heads of Fortune 500 companies. But women are continually growing in terms of entrepreneurs. But what we need, as we talk about resetting, is that they need more access to capital. They need more resources. They need more networks in order to expand their businesses. And we also recognize that with the number of women in corporate America, we still would like to see more Black women serving on corporate boards, and as well as more Black women heading some of the larger corporations. But in order to do that, then they need mentors, they need sponsors, and coaches. Also in the area of business, that we have to, Black women owners and corporate leaders also have to take a proactive approach to their health and wellness, because we don't need to have women in top positions if they cannot continue to function because they are not taking care of their health. Okay, the next section will look at resetting as it relates to politics, resetting in politics. And we had a number of victories of women in politics this year. However, we still have to look at that there are some challenges. One of the major challenges that we see for women running for political office is that we only have had one of the major political parties that seem to support Black women, and a lot of Black women have been connected to that political party. We have to look at how do we expand the support for women. And another big problem is that Women need to be able to win statewide. And that's Black women and Black men, but Black men have been more successful in winning statewide than Black women. And we also looking at how do Black women win in majority white districts. Okay, but in spite of these challenges, that Black women are a force to be reckoned in the political process. And we are very happy to announce our latest victory for Black women was when Jennifer McClellan became the first Black woman to win for the U.S. House of Representatives to join the U.S. Congress from the state of Virginia. Okay, in the area of education, one of the big concerns that Black women have is that there is this denigration and mischaracterization of critical race theory. And this is having an impact on the ability to teach Black history in our primary and secondary schools. So politicians, we're finding, are running on a campaign saying that they're going to remove critical race theory from the schools, when many of them are not. Critical race theory was not designed for primary and secondary education, but they are using this to camouflage their desire to remove Black history from the curriculum and to stop teaching that in our primary and secondary public schools. Next slide. When we look at the next area, we'll look at the federal judiciary. And our major win there was having the first Black woman join the U.S. Supreme Court as a justice, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. She was confirmed and sworn in. And so that is a major, major victory. Also, when we drill down in the lower levels of the federal judiciary, this is the first time we've had this big increase in Black women being nominated and confirmed as judges throughout the federal judiciary. We have Black women joining courts where we've never had Black women before. And this is a big cause for celebration. We hope that continues. Looking at health and well-being, Black women are rejuvenating and reimagining what is needed in our well-being, taking care of our bodies, minds, and spirits.
So as it relates to taking care of our bodies, minds, and spirits, one of the things that was pointed out in the report that is very critical is the fact that the strong Black woman trope is literally killing Black women. This is a broadly accepted archetype of Black. My apologies. So one of the things that we have found that is hurting Black women significantly is the fact that the strong Black woman trope is literally killing Black women. This is a broadly accepted archetype of Black women, but the reality is it serves as a self-silencing mechanism, in which case it then encourages Black women to hide their stress, their depression, and their trauma. And research actually shows that Black women who self-identify as strong Black women are more likely to experience debilitating depression and increased suicidal ideation. We also find that while identifying as strong can be inspirational and flattering at times, it becomes dangerous once one's humanity is ignored and emotions are suppressed instead of being openly acknowledged and processed. This leads into a rising crisis that we are seeing as it relates to mental health. It's been estimated that suicidal rates in the Black community have actually increased in recent years by some 30%. And for Black women especially, acknowledging and proactively centering mental health is long overdue. So in order to help individuals access mental health services, we have found that while stigmatization around mental health has actually decreased, as there's more information that's currently being shared on social media about the importance of mental health, the reality is that it's still very difficult for Black women to easily access mental health care services at an affordable and easily accessible level, and specifically mental health services provided by mental health professionals of color. One of the ways in which this report identifies that can be used to help address this problem is to make sure that mental health ambassadors are available to help bridge the gap between highlighting the availability of mental health services and specifically connecting individuals in need of that care with the individuals who can provide that care. It's also pointed out here that holistic well-being is the ultimate self-care. Black women often exist in chronic survival mode in this country, as is evidenced by what some have described as our hyper-independence, as well as our never-ending caregiving of others, which ultimately leads to a habit of self-sacrificing behavior and ultimately incessant resilience. This type of existence over time is ultimately very taxing on both the mind and the body. And so in order to address the absence of balance and restore calm, we suggest that rest is absolutely essential. It's very necessary in order to provide mental, physical, and spiritual well-being for Black women who ultimately suffer stressors in a wide variety of areas in her life. All right, Dr. Scott.
Okay, we have a section of the report we call Resist, and this is where we focus on Black women. Okay, the section of the report where we talk about resisting, we look at Black women are in the fight to protect our safety, our reproductive justice, and engagement in immigration justice. It is very sad that Black women tend to be victims of domestic violence at a greater level than other racial groups. And Black women are more likely to be killed by their spouses, an intimate acquaintance, or a family member than by a stranger. So too often, Black women feel that their voices are not being heard by the criminal justice system, as well as other government agencies. And so what happens is that Black women have to look for other resources to help them deal with domestic violence. And one of the major sources that Black women have found is turning to our sisters, that we have turned to our sisters in the church, but we are also finding that sisters are becoming the first responders for Black women as it relates to domestic violence. If we look at rape and sexual assault, that Black rape victims are often blamed for their sexual assault. That Black women and girls 12 years and older experience a higher rate of rape and sexual assault than other women and girls. And often when Black women report rape, they are not believed by the persons taking the report. We also have to address homicide in the Black community. That homicide rates are very high due to all the lenient gun control legislation we have, and it's reached epidemic proportions, whereas children, girls, adults are being killed at alarming rates. So the Black community is going to have to recognize this negative impact it's having on our society and try to address this emergency in dealing with government as well as community resources, as well as business community. Reproductive justice has to be recognized as a human right. That Black women in the United States are on an average approximately 3 times more likely to die of complications from pregnancy. And also, we have to make clear that these deaths are preventable and we need to address them in society. For Black women in the United States, giving birth can be more dangerous than in developing countries. And this is quite alarming. And this is because Black women are often subjected to racist conditions such as poverty, toxic environments, discriminatory medical system that make them sicker than white people before they, because of these conditions, then Black women often are sicker during pregnancy, and this leads to more deaths as well as problems during childbirth. So Black women have to advocate for reproductive justice. Reproductive justice is not just about the right to not have children. It's also the right to have children, to have healthy children, and to have children grow up in a safe community. Immigration fight. So often Black people, Black women are left out when we start talking about people involved in the immigration fight. But there are a lot of Black women, Black women's organizations that are playing a major role in fighting for immigration rights. As we look at more Black people immigrating to this country from the Caribbean countries as well as Africa, then we need to recognize that Black women are part of this fight and they need to not to be overlooked.
And Black women are taking action for justice. Mute. Let me go back. So privacy rights are indeed civil rights. Data has wide-ranging impacts on our lives. We know that. In fact, we know that housing advertisers target potential renters or buyers online based on race, religion, sex, and family status. Lending algorithms have been found to calculate higher interest rates for borrowers when they attend HBCUs, or historically Black colleges and universities. We also know that in the 2016 presidential election, Black Americans were targeted for misinformation by Russian operatives, accounting for fully 38% of US-focused ads. Similarly, 3.5 million African Americans were categorized by the Trump campaign during the 2020 presidential election as deterrence voters, meaning that these were voters they simply wanted to keep away from the ballot box. Knowing that, we know that improving privacy rights are crucial for the protection of Black community from unscrupulous behavior in the future. Black women are also taking action against maternal mortality. In 2023, Black women continue to die or have serious negative consequences of childbirth, resulting in death or harm to the baby, more than any other racial or ethnic group in America. Now, this is true across socioeconomic status. So to address this problem, we suggest that several actions need to take place. For example, there needs to be greater diversification of the medical workforce, including inclusive and supportive workforce environments for underrepresented physicians, including training around implicit bias. There needs to be greater anti-racism training in medical settings. There needs to be a greater focus on promoting inclusivity in medical settings. And we need to make sure that we are holding those responsible for unprofessional and discriminatory behaviors accountable for their actions. In terms of how Black women have fared in this economy, we know that Black women's labor force participation has in fact bounced back since the pandemic. In February of 2020, just before the pandemic, Black women's labor force participation rate was 63.9%. which was the leading labor force participation rate of all women in America, as it has been historically. In January 2023, Black women's labor force participation rate had rebounded back to almost that level, reaching 62.6%, once again, the highest of any group of women in America, compared to 59.3%, where it had dipped down to as of April of 2020 during the pandemic. But still, Black women still suffer a disproportionately high unemployment rate. Despite their continued strong labor force attachment, Black women are more likely to experience unemployment. As of February 2020, Black women's unemployment rate was 4.8%, and by May of 2020, unemployment among Black women peaked at 16.6%. So although Black women's unemployment has decreased as of January 2023, back down to 4.7%, it's still comparatively high when we look at the unemployment rate of white women, which is 2.8%, and that of Asian American women and Latinas, which are 2.6% and 4.4% respectively. Additionally, Black women still experience a double wage gap. In 2020, women workers overall were paid just 77 cents for every dollar paid to a man. However, Black women workers were paid just 64 cents to every dollar made by white male workers, while white women were paid 73 cents to the dollar, and Native American and Latina women were paid 51 and 54% respectively. Wage gaps have long-term implications. Over the course of a 40-year career, the wage gap results in a loss of nearly $400,000 for the average woman in America. But for Black women, that loss over the time of her career in the workforce is $900,000, okay? Nearly $1 million she loses just based on the wage gap that she suffers over the course of her career. And in some areas, that disparity is even worse. In the Washington, D.C. area, for example, that average lifetime wage loss for Black women is at $2 million when compared to earnings of white men in that same locality. So occupational segregation, we know, is one of the primary drivers of race and gender wage gaps for Black women, as Black women are especially likely to work in low-paying service sector jobs. So we believe that supporting Black women's employment requires improving wages and benefits, specifically in those occupations where they are disproportionately likely to work. We also believe that there are a range of legislative actions that can happen in order to address this problem positively. So we believe that it's very important that the Paycheck Fairness Act is passed in order to strengthen pay discrimination laws, permit pay transparency, and limit the use of prior salary and job negotiation opportunities. We also believe that the Family Medical Leave Act should pass, which would provide 12 weeks of paid leave, while the Child Care for Working Families Act would provide childcare and early learning to low and moderate income families, things that we know are huge drainers on the income and earnings of working families. We also believe that the Fair Employment Protection Act would raise the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour and phase out sub-minimum wage for tipped workers, youth workers, and workers with disabilities. This would lead to increased take-home pay for those workers. And in addition to these federal bills, we also strongly encourage state leaders to also adopt workplace policies that would close the wage gap. Finally, in terms of the Equal Rights Amendment, we believe that if this were to become an amendment to the Constitution, it would provide greater protections for Black women. The ERA would give Black women the legal support that we need for existing and future laws so that we can fight more aggressively on behalf of sex equality throughout this nation. It would provide a greater focus on intersectional discrimination, improve employment and educational opportunities, and provide recourse against gender-based violence and improved access to health care, including reproductive and maternal care. So with that, I am going to hand it back over to Joycelyn.
Thank you so much, Dr. Scott and Dr. Avis Jones-DeWeaver. Let me ask you a quick question. Dr. Avis, Dr. DeWeaver, you have been working on this report since its inception 10 years ago. So let me ask you, what issues in the report over the years have you seen Black women, how have issues changed or not changed in the report over these last 10 years?
Absolutely, thanks, that's an excellent question. In terms of the things that have not changed, that's been particularly disturbing and very disturbing, is the degree to which Black women still suffer disproportionately when it comes to issues like maternal mortality and wage gaps. It is startling to think that Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die in this country just by attempting to have the very normal human experience of giving birth. And that is something that is not impacted by how much education she has, how much money she makes. I mean, this is something that impacts us across socioeconomic status. We know the stories of, for example, Serena Williams fighting for her care when she was attempting to give birth. So it can happen to any of us. And this is something that we reported on in our very first report 10 years ago. And it's a problem that we're still facing to this day. Similarly, this issue of wage gaps, the double wage gap that Black women face remains. And it's really quite ironic because just yesterday we acknowledged Equal Pay Day in America, but we know that Black women's Equal Pay Day is not going to come this year until September. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in order to make sure that Black women are paid more equitably, no matter where they are in the labor market, as well as making sure that those specific industries in which we know Black women are most likely to be clustered are provided higher wages and better benefits so that those women can receive the level of compensation that they deserve for the very important work that they do. In terms of sort of the other things that I would say that have improved, I would say the thing that stands out for me the most is our political representation. We are seeing more women elected to office. We have our first ever Black woman Supreme Court member. And so when we're talking about our political representation, although we still have a long way to go, we are better off, I believe, than we were 10 years ago.
Thank you so much. Dr. Scott, what issues,
and I'll ask you both, in this report, what issues were addressed that stood out to you particularly this year?
One issue, one issue that particularly stood out to me this year was the whole issue of homicide. We've been talking about domestic violence for many years, but women are concerned that their children are being murdered. Their neighbors are being murdered. And so this was particular to me, and they want to really see more resources, both in their communities as well as from their government, as well as they want to see people in the community are more concerned about the number of women that are being killed, and especially the number of children, young girls that are being killed. And then, like Avis, on the celebration side, the fact that we have more women in the federal judiciary than ever before, including a Black woman justice. So I think, we've been talking about increases in number of women mayors and in Congress, but this is the first time we are able to report that we have a significant increase in number of women serving on the federal bench.
And also, may I add that we just need to acknowledge that we also have a Black woman as vice president of the United States. So, these are tremendous historic gains that we've seen over the past 10 years, and we're excited to keep that momentum going.
any other issues?
Well, I think what's very interesting also is what we've seen with regards to this issue of reproductive justice, and particularly in this sort of post-Roe world. I think it's important is that we acknowledge, because of this issue of maternal mortality that we've spoken on and touched on for the past decade, this issue of having access to reproductive justice is critical. And it takes into account everything, not only access to care with regards to the ability to choose when and where and how many children that you want to have, or if you want to have children, but reproductive justice also takes into account your ability to bring children in safe environments and bring them up and rear them in safe environments and have your children thrive. And so in having access to a safe community where they don't have to worry about their safety, having access to quality education, including access to Black history. As someone who actually used critical race theory as the theoretical underpinning of my dissertation, I can tell you factually that it is not taught at the elementary and secondary level. And so that attack against critical race theory is completely a ruse. It is a political decision that to tie into racist divisions in this country in order to hide the truth telling of Black history. And so I think it's very important that we ensure that when our children are in school, they receive factual teaching, including teaching of our very rich history, which is important not only to our culture specifically, but important to this nation as a whole.
Thank you. That's an excellent point. One more question before we open it up to our the press for questions. Dr. Scott. Oh, sorry. Thank you so much, Dr. Avis. One more question before we open it up to the press for questions. I wanted to ask you, Dr. Scott, as a scholar of political science and founding
director of the Ronald Walters Leadership and Public Policy Center at Howard University, from a policy perspective, what policy solutions, if any, did the Black women provide to issues that they were facing in this report?
Thank you for that question. I think the major policy issue that I saw in some of the essays was this whole issue of health disparities, because it cuts across the discussion of reproductive rights. It cuts across the discussion about businesses. If women are not taking care of their health, and if they don't have good health care. So I think that health, and this is something we've been talking about for 10 years at the Black Women's Roundtable, is health disparities exist in this country. They continue to exist. And that's something that Black women have to continue to fight for themselves and for their children. Some other health implications, policy implications that I found in the reports was this whole area of domestic violence, of women feeling like the government is not addressing this. More Black women are being murdered. And when we in one essay, a woman talked about the fact that our sisters have to become our first responders because the government is not doing it in terms of addressing the whole issue of Black women being murdered, Black women being beaten by their significant others. And it's something that we really have to address, and starting with the church and going all the way down. But it is a good news story, I guess, that in one of the essays, the woman talked about how sisters have to be your first responders when it relates to domestic violence. And it was mentioned also about gun control, which is another health policy issue, that we continue to see these mass killings throughout the country. And the gun legislation is not, there's no gun control legislation being passed. At the local level, they are loosening up gun controls. They are allowing people to take guns to church and every place else. So there's some serious policy issues as it relates to gun control, which has an implication also on homicide.
Thank you so much, Dr. Scott. At this time, we'll open it up to the press. If you have any questions for our co-editors, we'll take those questions now. And I'll turn to our comms team to let me know if there's any questions. You can ask your question now. I believe we can hear you.
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Question?
Yes, ma'am. My question was within regards to, you all were talking about Black women's fertility rate, the fact that unfortunately the healthcare system just isn't always guaranteed to help us have healthy babies, or better yet, like you said, even live through the process. Could you guys speak about the significance of doulas and kind of like birth mothers and how they're, I'm not even gonna say more helpful, but just like their history, we as Black women serving as them, the laws that have been put in place to kind of restrict that, and what can be done so that we can, live to help raise these children that we're having.
I can start there. Okay, I can start with that. I'm just making sure. Okay. Making sure I wasn't hearing feedback. I would say, though I don't believe we addressed that directly in this report, I would definitely say that anecdotally, and also with another business that I own, having doulas as my clients from time to time, I can tell you that that work is critically important. It is a way that mothers can get some very personalized care and get some support. It's also important that they can have choices about where they want to have that birthing experience. And if they choose to have that birthing experience in a hospital, I just think it definitely helps to have an advocate for the laboring mother. We know that oftentimes in those situations where Black women unfortunately are dying unnecessarily, it's very hard sometimes to get the medical professionals that they have entrusted their lives to even listen to them. And so I also believe that in addition to all of the various benefits that I've just anecdotally seen data around that it does sort of help with that birthing process, that even if you just have someone else in that birthing room with you that can be your advocate and who has a medical background to know when something is wrong and make sure that people are acting appropriately. To me, it seems like that would be a very beneficial experience for any mother.
We have another question. Another question from the press. Aria Brent. Oh, I'm sorry. Tashi McQueen. Her hand's not raised. Okay. Any other questions from the press? We'll take those now. Seeing no more questions from the press, this will conclude
our press briefing. If you have any other questions
about the report, you can please send those questions and
inquiries to communications@ncbcp.org. I want to thank Dr. Avis Jones-DeWeaver and Dr. Elsie Scott for being the co-editors of this report this year. We hope that you find all of this information informative, and we look forward to talking with you again about the ongoing issues that Black women are facing in this country soon. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Jocelyn, and I'm going to give all three of you all a round of sisterly applause. And thank you all for pulling together, and all of the writers and the contributors, well over 40, if I'm not mistaken, who took the time to weigh in this year and bring their thoughts and ideas and research and experience and expertise to this report. And if you're watching out there, first we thank Roland Martin Unfiltered for serving as our media partner again this year for the report, as well as this is the soft launch, if you will, as I mentioned earlier, of our Black Women's Roundtable 12th annual Women of Power National Summit. And so we have 4.5 days of some really, really dynamic empowerment going on. We're going to be on Capitol Hill. We're going to having a briefing at the White House. We're going to be pouring in. We're going to be focused on health and wellness. The report reflects the theme for this year of reset, rejuvenate, reimagine our power so we can resist, act, and win. It's not too late. We have a virtual opportunity. We are sold out for joining us in person this year, but you can go to blackwomensroundtable.org, blackwomensroundtable.org, and join us. And many of the contributors will actually be speakers as well. And even you can not just watch us, but you can engage online if you register. So we thank you again for our assistant editor and our co-editors in chief, and hope to see you at the summit. Thank you.